Welcome to Northern Mystery Archives. Here we don't soften the truth and we don't skip the details. We investigate the forgotten files from the far north of Canada, the disappearances that were quietly shelved, the settlements that faded from every map, the transmissions that were never meant to be heard again. In this channel, nothing is hidden. Every fragment, every silence, every erased trail is examined with the seriousness these cases deserved but never received. If you value cold, atmospheric, minimalist investigations into the unexplained wilderness of the North, you're in the right place. Subscribe, stay close, and step with us into the files they hoped no one would ever revisit. Below, we will be speaking about the case titled Jonas Kilroy, April 9, 1975, haunting Snowfield disappearance. It all began when, each time someone changed their mind, the folder itself is thin, surprisingly thin for a case that lingered as long as it did. The tab at the top reads only a surname and a date. Kilroy, April 9, 1975. No first name on the exterior, no location identifier, just those two pieces of information written in pen that has faded to the color of rust. Inside, the pages are brittle. Some of them have separated along the folds. Others are stained with what looks like coffee, though the stains are decades old. The first document is a handwritten intake form from a rural detachment office, filled out in hurried script. It lists the basics: male, late 20s, last seen traveling north along a maintenance road that had no official name, vehicle recovered, subject not recovered. The box labeled outcome was left blank. The name Jonas Kilroy appears only 4 times in provincial records, once in a vehicle registration, once in the employment roster from a lumber outfit that folded in 1978, once in a motel ledger from a town that no longer appears on any map, and once in this file. There are no photographs. There is no next of kin listed. The forwarding address section contains only a question mark. The case was opened on April 12th, 3 days after the last confirmed sighting. It was transferred between departments twice. The second transfer included a note that simply read, "No jurisdiction, return to origin." But the origin office had been consolidated into a regional unit by then, and the file drifted. It resurfaced in 1981 during an archive reorganization. A clerk added a note suggesting it be destroyed. The destruction order was never carried out. What makes this file unusual is not what it contains, it is what it does not contain. There are no witness statements, there are no search logs, there are no photographs of the scene, though a scene was documented. There is a reference to evidence collected, but no evidence list. There is mention of a recovered item, but no description of the item. There is a handwritten note in the margin of the second page that says only, "Temperature inconsistent." Snow had drifted into the cab through the open door, covering the bench seat and the floorboards. The keys were not in the ignition. They were found later, lying in the snow approximately 11 meters from the vehicle, partially buried. A thermos was found on the passenger seat. It was still sealed. The contents were later described as coffee, though the report does not specify who opened it or when. A folded map was tucked into the door pocket. The map showed a region of forest and lake country north of the 55th parallel, with no roads marked beyond a certain point. Someone had drawn a circle in pencil around a section of blank space near the top edge of the map. There was no annotation. Jonas Kilroy had told the clerk at the motel he was heading north to check a property. He did not say what kind of property. He did not say how long he would be gone. The clerk remembered him because he paid in cash and because he asked whether the road north was passable in April. The clerk said it depended on the weather. Kilroy nodded and left. That was the last anyone spoke to him. The maintenance road he traveled was a remnant of a logging operation that had been abandoned in the late 1960s. It ran for 37 kilometers through dense spruce and tamarack, following the eastern shore of a narrow lake that had no official name. The road ended at a clearing where equipment had once been stored. Beyond the clearing, the forest resumed, unbroken. The clearing itself was empty, no buildings, no structures, just flattened ground and the pale scars of old tire tracks, mostly erased by weather. The truck was found 4 kilometers south of the clearing. There was no indication it had turned around. There was no indication it had stopped before reaching that spot. The snow around the vehicle had been disturbed, but not in a way that suggested struggle. The footprints that were found led away from the truck in a northeastern direction, moving into the trees. The prints were deep and evenly spaced. They continued for 60 meters. Then they stopped. The file does not explain how the prints stopped. It does not say they faded or were covered. It says only that they stopped. The last print was complete, clear, pressed into snow that was otherwise undisturbed. Beyond it, nothing. No continuation, no scuff marks, no drag marks, no further impressions of any kind. Just unmarked snow extending into the forest. A search was conducted on April 11th. The report describes the effort as limited due to weather and terrain. Visibility was poor. The temperature had dropped overnight. The search covered a radius of 2 kilometers from the vehicle. No additional evidence was found. No clothing, no tools, no signs of passage. The search was called off after 6 hours. The file does not say why. The last entry in the file is dated April 19th. It is a single sentence, typed on a separate sheet of paper and clipped to the back of the folder. It reads, "Case suspended, pending further information." No signature, no department stamp. Just that one sentence, and then nothing. Jonas Kilroy was never declared dead. The region where Jonas Kilroy disappeared does not have a name that most people would recognize. It sits in the transitional zone between the boreal plains and the shield country, a stretch of land characterized by shallow soil, exposed bedrock, and forest that grows dense and low. The lakes are cold and dark, fed by runoff and underground springs. In April, the ice is beginning to rot, but it has not yet broken. The snow is heavy and wet, clinging to the trees and muffling sound. The maintenance road Kilroy traveled was built in 1963 by a logging company that operated under a short-term lease. The company cut selectively, targeting mature spruce in accessible areas near the lakeshore. The operation lasted less than 4 years. By 1967, the lease had been terminated, and the company had moved to a more profitable region farther west. The road was left behind, unimproved and unmaintained. Within a decade, sections of it had begun to wash out. By 1975, it was used mostly by hunters and trappers who knew the area well enough to navigate it without signs. The lake the road follows is approximately 9 kilometers long and less than a kilometer wide. It runs north to south, hemmed in by low ridges covered in stunted spruce and patches of exposed granite. The water is deep in the center, over 30 meters in places, and shallow near the edges, where beds of submerged rock create hazards for boats. There are no settlements on the lake. There are no cabins. There is nothing to suggest anyone ever lived there, though old maps show a notation near the southern end that reads, "Survey Camp, 1948. No evidence of such a camp has been found. The forest surrounding the lake is typical of the region. Black spruce dominates, interspersed with tamarack and the occasional stand of jack pine. The understory is thick with Labrador tea and moss. In spring, the ground is saturated, and walking off the road becomes difficult. The terrain is uneven, broken by small rises and shallow depressions that fill with meltwater. Visibility is limited. Sound carries strangely, absorbed by the density of the trees and the wetness of the snow. April in this part of the north is a month of transition. The days are growing longer, but the temperature remains unpredictable. It can drop below freezing at night and rise above it during the day, creating conditions that make travel difficult. Snow becomes soft and heavy. Ice becomes treacherous. The wildlife is active again after the long winter, but the signs of that activity are often obscured by the changing conditions. Tracks appear and disappear within hours. The landscape is in a state of flux, neither winter nor spring, caught between. The clearing at the end of the maintenance road was once a staging area. Equipment was stored there during the logging operation. Fuel drums, spare parts, tools. When the company left, most of the equipment was removed, but some items were abandoned. A rusted drum still lies on its side near the western edge of the clearing, half buried in moss and soil. There are no other remnants, no foundations, no refuse piles, just the clearing itself, roughly circular, about 50 meters across. The area beyond the clearing has never been logged. The trees there are older, thicker, their trunks scarred by fire and weather. The forest floor is dense with deadfall, branches and entire trunks lying in overlapping layers. Travel through it is slow and exhausting. There are no trails. There are no landmarks that would allow someone to orient themselves easily. The forest looks the same in every direction, a uniform expanse of green and grey and white. Local knowledge of the area is sparse. The few people who were familiar with the region in 1975 are no longer available to provide information. Some have passed away. Others have moved. The ones who remain do not remember much, or they choose not to. When asked about the maintenance road, one former trapper described it as a road to nowhere. When asked about the lake, another said only that it was quiet. When pressed for details, he added, too quiet. The region was simply remote, unvisited, and unremarkable. It was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere else, or avoided entirely because there was no reason to go there. The logging company had come and gone. The survey camp, if it ever existed, had left no trace. The lake had no name because no one had ever needed to name it. The weather on April 9, 1975, was documented at a station approximately 80 kilometers to the southwest. The records show clear skies in the morning, with temperatures just below freezing. By afternoon, cloud cover had moved in, and the temperature had risen slightly. There was no precipitation. Wind speeds were light. Conditions were described as favorable for travel, though the notation comes with the caveat that conditions in the north can vary significantly over short distances. What the weather records do not capture is the quality of the light. In early spring, the light in the northern forest is flat and diffuse, filtered through branches and clouds in a way that makes distances hard to judge. Shadows are faint. Contrasts are muted. The snow reflects what little light there is, creating a kind of luminous grayness that can be disorienting. People who have spent time in such conditions describe it as featureless, a landscape without reference points, where the eye struggles to find anything to fix on. The maintenance road itself is narrow, barely wide enough for a single vehicle. In places, it is more of a suggestion than a road, a flattened trace through the trees that can be difficult to follow when snow obscures the edges. There are no markers, no signs, no indication of distance or direction. Someone unfamiliar with the area could easily become lost, even while staying on the road. The road curves and doubles back on itself, following the contours of the land rather than cutting straight through. Jonas Kilroy had no known connection to the area. He had not grown up there. He had not worked there. The employment roster that lists his name places him with a lumber outfit over 200 kilometers to the south, in a region of mixed forest and farmland. Why he traveled north in April, what property he intended to check, and how he knew about the maintenance road are questions the file does not answer. There is no evidence he had been to the area before. There is no evidence he knew anyone who had. The motel where he stayed the night before his disappearance was located in a small supply hub that serviced trappers, loggers, and the occasional government crew. The motel had 8 rooms. The clerk, who remembered Kilroy, described him as ordinary. The discovery of the vehicle was accidental. A crew from a regional utilities contractor was traveling the maintenance road on the morning of April 10th, en route to inspect a series of old survey markers that had been flagged for removal. The crew consisted of 3 men. They were traveling in a heavy truck equipped for rough terrain. They had not expected to encounter another vehicle. The blue pickup was spotted at approximately 9:30 in the morning. It was parked at an angle, the rear wheels on the road, the front wheels in the snow at the road's edge. The driver's side door was open. From a distance, it looked as though someone had pulled over and stepped out briefly. But as the crew approached, it became clear that something was wrong. The cab was filled with snow. The seat was covered. The floor was covered. Snow had drifted in through the open door and settled undisturbed. The crew stopped their truck approximately 15 meters behind the pickup. The driver got out first. He approached the vehicle slowly, calling out. There was no response. He reached the open door and looked inside. The interior was empty. No personal belongings on the seat, no jackets, no tools, just the thermos and the folded map. He called out again. His voice carried into the trees and faded. The forest absorbed it. The second crew member joined him. Together, they walked around the vehicle, looking for signs of the driver. The snow around the truck was disturbed, but not dramatically. There were footprints leading away from the driver's side, heading into the trees to the northeast. The prints were clear and deep, the kind left by someone walking with purpose, not running. The crew followed the prints for a short distance, perhaps 20 meters, calling out intermittently. The prints continued into the forest, moving between the trees in a straight line. At some point, one of the crew members noticed the keys. They were lying in the snow a few meters from the truck, partially buried. He picked them up and brought them back. The keys were cold, frosted with ice. There were 3 keys on the ring, one for the ignition, one that looked like a house key, one that was unmarked and worn smooth. The crew placed the keys on the hood of the pickup and continued searching the immediate area. The third crew member remained by the truck. He opened the passenger door and examined the map. The circle drawn in pencil caught his attention. He studied it for a moment, then folded the map and placed it back in the door pocket. He checked the glove compartment. It was empty, except for a vehicle registration card. The name on the card was Jonas Kilroy. The address was listed as a post office box in a town the crew member did not recognize. The crew spent approximately 45 minutes at the scene. They walked the perimeter. They followed the footprints as far as they felt comfortable going. They called out repeatedly. They found nothing else, no additional tracks, no signs of struggle, no abandoned items. The forest was quiet. The only sound was the wind moving through the upper branches and the occasional creak of a tree settling under the weight of snow. At some point, the decision was made to report the vehicle. The crew returned to their truck and continued north to the clearing where they could access their radio equipment. The report was relayed to the nearest detachment office at approximately 11 o'clock. The officer who took the report asked whether the vehicle had been tampered with. The crew said no. The officer asked whether there were any signs of injury. The crew said they had not found any. The officer said someone would be dispatched to the scene and asked the crew to wait at the clearing. The officer arrived at the scene just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He came alone, driving a standard patrol vehicle that was not well suited to the conditions. He parked behind the blue pickup and conducted his own examination. He photographed the vehicle from multiple angles, though those photographs are not included in the file. He noted the open door, the snow in the cab, the keys on the hood. He examined the footprints leading into the trees and followed them farther than the crew had. The footprints continued in a straight line for 60 meters. The officer measured the distance using a ranging tape he carried in his vehicle. The prints were evenly spaced, each one clear and complete. They did not deviate. They did not falter. And then, at 60 meters, they stopped. The officer stood at the final print for several minutes, studying the snow ahead of him. It was smooth, undisturbed, marked only by the faint indentations left by falling branches and the texture of wind-pressed snow. He widened his search, moving in concentric circles around the final print. He covered an area of approximately 50 square meters. He found nothing, no continuation of the trail, no disturbance in the snow. No broken branches, no scuff marks, no drag marks. The forest floor beyond the final print was as smooth as if no one had ever walked there. He returned to the print and photographed it. Then he returned to the vehicle. The officer opened the driver's side door and sat in the seat, brushing snow from the upholstery. He examined the interior more closely. The thermos was sealed, as the crew had noted. He did not open it. The map was still in the door pocket. He unfolded it and studied the pencil circle. It marked an area approximately 12 kilometers north of the clearing, in a section of forest with no identifiable features. No lakes, no roads, just blank space. He refolded the map and took it with him. The vehicle registration provided the name Jonas Kilroy, but no additional information. The officer ran the name through available records. There was no criminal history, no outstanding warrants, no flags. The address listed on the registration was a post office box. The officer made a note to follow up with the post office, though that follow-up does not appear in the file. The vehicle itself was unremarkable, no damage, no signs of mechanical failure. The fuel gauge showed half a tank. The officer left the scene at approximately 3 o'clock. He returned to the detachment office and filed an initial report. The report described the vehicle as abandoned and the driver as missing. It noted the unusual nature of the footprints and recommended a search. The search was scheduled for the following day, weather permitting. That evening, the temperature dropped sharply. By morning, a light snow had fallen, covering the tracks and obscuring much of the evidence at the scene. The search team that arrived on April 11th found the blue pickup exactly as the officer had described it, but the footprints were gone. The new snow had filled them in, leaving only faint depressions that could have been anything. The search proceeded anyway, covering a 2-kilometer radius from the vehicle, but conditions were poor. Visibility was limited, the temperature hovered just below freezing, and the snow was heavy and wet. The search team found nothing, no additional footprints, no clothing, no personal items, no signs that anyone had passed through the area. The forest was silent, dense, and uncooperative. The formal investigation into the disappearance of Jonas Kilroy began on April 12th. It was assigned to a regional unit that handled cases across a wide jurisdiction, most of them routine. The officer in charge was experienced with wilderness incidents, though his caseload was heavy and resources were limited. The file he inherited was thin: one vehicle report, one witness statement from the utilities crew, one initial search log, and a series of unanswered questions. The first step was to establish identity. Jonas Kilroy was not a common name, but it was not unique. The officer contacted the post office listed on the vehicle registration and requested information about the box holder. The response took 3 days. When it arrived, it provided little. The box had been rented in 1973. The rental agreement listed no forwarding address and no emergency contact. Rent had been paid through the end of 1975. The post office clerk remembered no one by that name. The vehicle itself was processed more thoroughly. It was towed from the scene and brought to a secured lot where it could be examined under controlled conditions. The interior was photographed again. The snow that had accumulated in the cab was melted and filtered. Nothing of interest was found. The thermos was opened. The contents were confirmed as coffee, cold and unremarkable. The map was analyzed. The pencil circle showed no distinguishing characteristics. The paper was standard. The pencil mark was ordinary. Fingerprints were lifted from the steering wheel, the door handle, and the thermos. They matched across all three surfaces, suggesting a single individual. The prints were submitted for comparison against available databases. No matches were found. Jonas Kilroy, whoever he was, had no prior record that would place his fingerprints in the system. The officer made a note. Subject unidentified through prints. The payroll records listed only a name and a social insurance number. The social insurance number was traced. It had been issued in 1969. It had been used sporadically for employment purposes, mostly in manual labor positions. There were gaps of several months between uses. The pattern suggested someone who moved frequently, worked short-term contracts, and left little trace. The officer noted transient profile, limited documentation. Average height, dark hair, quiet demeanor, unremarkable. The officer reviewed the map found in Kilroy's vehicle with greater scrutiny. The pencil circle marked an area that contained no known structures, no historical sites, and no active leases or claims. A record search revealed that the area had been surveyed in the late 1940s as part of a broader provincial mapping initiative, but no development had followed. The land was classified as Crown land, open to public access, but unmanaged. There were no trails, no designated campsites, no reason anyone would travel there. The possibility that Kilroy had been meeting someone was considered. No evidence supported it. No second vehicle had been reported in the area. No communications had been logged. The utilities crew had not encountered anyone else on the road. The officer made inquiries with local trappers and hunters who might have been active in the region during early April. None reported seeing another person. None reported seeing the blue pickup before it was discovered. The question of why the footprints stopped became central to the investigation. The officer returned to the scene on April 14th after the snow from the previous day had settled. He retraced the path the prints had taken, measuring and photographing. The prints had moved in a straight line, deviating only slightly to avoid trees. They had been evenly spaced, suggesting a normal walking pace. They had been pressed deep into the snow, indicating weight and deliberate movement, and then they had stopped. The officer examined the area surrounding the final print again. He expanded his search to include a radius of 100 meters. He looked for any indication of what might have caused the trail to end. He found no fallen branches heavy enough to obscure subsequent prints. He found no areas where the snow had drifted in a way that might have filled in additional tracks. The snow beyond the final print was smooth and undisturbed, marked only by natural patterns. He considered the possibility that Kilroy had retraced his steps, walking backward in his own prints to disguise his trail. The officer tested this theory by attempting it himself. The result was immediately distinguishable from a single-direction trail. Walking backward left marks that were shallower at the heel and deeper at the toe. It disturbed the edges of the original prints. It was not consistent with what had been observed. The officer ruled out this possibility. He considered the possibility that Kilroy had climbed a tree. The trees in the immediate area were examined. None showed signs of recent disturbance. No broken branches, no bark scraped away, no marks in the snow at the base. Climbing a tree in early April, when the branches are brittle and the trunks are often iced, would leave evidence. No evidence was found. He considered the possibility that Kilroy had been picked up by someone or something. This theory required the presence of another party, either on foot or using a vehicle. There were no additional footprints, no tire tracks, no disturbance in the surrounding snow. If Kilroy had been picked up, it had happened in a way that left no trace. The officer noted this in the file, but offered no explanation for how it could have occurred. The investigation expanded to include inquiries about Kilroy's background. The officer contacted the town listed on the vehicle registration, requesting any available records. The response was minimal. No birth certificate on file, no property records, no utility accounts, no voter registration. It was as though Jonas Kilroy had appeared in 1969 with the issuance of a social insurance number and had existed only in fragments since then. Employment records, vehicle registration, a motel ledger. And then, in April 1975, he had disappeared. The officer conducted interviews with individuals who had worked at the same lumber outfit as Kilroy in 1972. Most did not remember him. One foreman recalled a man by that name who had kept to himself and had left without explanation after completing his contract. The foreman described him as competent but uncommunicative. Another worker remembered someone who matched the description but could provide no additional details. No one knew where Kilroy had gone after leaving the lumber outfit. No one had stayed in contact. The thermos found in the vehicle was tested for residue beyond the coffee. The results were inconclusive. No foreign substances were detected. The coffee itself was standard, commercially available, and showed no signs of contamination. The thermos was returned to evidence storage. The map was similarly unremarkable. No hidden marks, no coded messages. Just a standard topographical map with a single pencil circle. The keys recovered from the snow were examined. 2 of them were traced. The ignition key matched the vehicle. The house key was tested against common lock types, but could not be definitively linked to any known address. The 3rd key, worn and unmarked, could not be identified. It did not match any standard pattern. The officer submitted it for analysis. The analysis concluded only that it was old, possibly decades old, and had been used extensively. The possibility of foul play was considered. The vehicle showed no signs of struggle. The interior was orderly. There was no blood, no torn fabric, no indications that violence had occurred. The footprints leading into the forest suggested that Kilroy had exited the vehicle voluntarily and had walked away under his own power. There was no evidence of coercion, no evidence of pursuit. The case of Jonas Kilroy generated little public attention at the time, but among the few individuals who reviewed the file in subsequent years, several theories emerged. None were officially endorsed. None were formally investigated. They remain speculations, attempts to impose logic on a disappearance that resists it. The first theory suggests that Kilroy staged his own disappearance. Proponents of this theory point to the lack of personal history, the transient employment pattern, and the absence of close connections. They argue that someone wishing to vanish could do so by abandoning a vehicle in a remote location, walking far enough to evade casual search efforts, and then doubling back using a secondary route. The empty thermos and the folded map, they suggest, were props, items left to create the appearance of an interrupted journey. This theory encounters significant problems. The footprints leading into the forest did not double back. The search conducted on April 11th covered a wide area. No secondary trail was found. No evidence of another vehicle was discovered. If Kilroy had staged his disappearance, he had done so with extraordinary care and under conditions that would have made such precision difficult. The theory also fails to address the abrupt termination of the footprints. Walking backward in existing prints leaves detectable evidence. Kilroy's trail simply stopped. The second theory proposes that Kilroy met with an accident. The northern forest in April is hazardous. The snow is deep and unstable. Beneath the snow, the ground is uneven, broken by rocks and depressions that can turn an ankle or cause a fall. Hypothermia can set in quickly if someone is injured and unable to move. Proponents of this theory suggest that Kilroy walked into the forest, encountered an obstacle, fell, and succumbed to exposure. His body, they argue, could have been buried by subsequent snowfall or obscured by the density of the forest. This theory is plausible but incomplete. If Kilroy fell, his footprints should have shown signs of disturbance. A fall leaves scuff marks, displaced snow, and an irregular trail. The prints observed by the utilities crew and the investigating officer were even and deliberate. They did not falter. They did not show hesitation. They moved in a straight line and then stopped cleanly. Additionally, the search on April 11th, though limited, covered the area where an accident would most likely have occurred. No body was found. No evidence of a fall was detected. The third theory involves animal activity. The northern forest is home to wolves, bears, and other predators. In April, many of these animals are emerging from winter dormancy and are actively hunting. Proponents of this theory suggest that Kilroy encountered an animal, was attacked, and was either killed or dragged away from the trail. The abrupt end of the footprints, they argue, could indicate the point where the animal intercepted him. This theory also has weaknesses. Animal attacks leave evidence: blood, torn clothing, drag marks, disturbance in the snow. The search team found none of these signs. The footprints did not show panic or flight. They did not veer or stumble. They continued in a straight line until they stopped. If an animal had attacked Kilroy, the scene would have reflected that violence. The scene was undisturbed. The fourth theory is environmental. The northern landscape in early spring is unstable. Snowdrifts can hide voids. Ice can conceal open water. Sinkholes can form where the ground has thawed unevenly. Proponents of this theory suggest that Kilroy stepped onto unstable ground, broke through, and fell into a concealed void. The snow then collapsed around him, covering the opening and erasing the evidence. This theory is difficult to evaluate. The area where the footprints ended was examined for signs of collapse or disturbance. None were found. The snow was smooth. The investigating officer tested the ground in multiple locations and found it solid. However, the nature of such voids is that they can be small, localized, and easily missed during a limited search. If Kilroy fell into a concealed space, it is possible that the opening closed behind him, leaving no trace. But no such voids were documented in the area, and no similar incidents had been reported. The fifth theory is less concrete. It suggests that Kilroy was not alone, that someone or something met him in the forest, at the point where his footprints stopped. This theory does not specify who or what that might have been. It relies on the absence of evidence, the inexplicable nature of the trail's termination, and the sense that something interrupted Kilroy's journey in a way that left no physical trace. Proponents of this theory often cite the officer's note about temperature inconsistencies, though the file provides no context for that remark. This theory is the most speculative. It requires accepting that an event occurred which defies conventional explanation. It requires positing the presence of another party without evidence. It rests on the idea that some disappearances are not solvable, not because the evidence was lost or the investigation was inadequate, but because the event itself falls outside the boundaries of what can be documented and understood. It is a theory of last resort, invoked when all others fail. There is a sixth perspective, though it is not a theory in the formal sense. It is the view held by those who have spent time in the northern wilderness, who understand its vastness and its capacity to erase. They argue that the forest does not need to explain itself, that a man can walk into the trees and simply not return, that the search was limited, the conditions were poor, and the landscape is larger and more complex than any investigation can fully account for. Kilroy's body is out there, they say, somewhere in the forest, covered by snow and moss and time. It will never be found because the forest does not give up what it takes. This perspective offers no answers. It does not resolve the mystery of the footprints. It does not explain why the keys were found in the snow. It does not address the pencil circle on the map. It simply acknowledges that some things remain unknown, not because the truth is hidden, but because the truth is lost. The blue pickup truck remained in the evidence lot for 11 months. In March of 1976, it was released and sold at auction. The buyer was not recorded. The vehicle registration was never renewed. The truck disappeared into the background of ordinary transactions, likely repurposed, dismantled, or forgotten. It had served its purpose. It had told the investigators everything it could, and what it told them was not enough. The map with the pencil circle was retained in the file. Over the years, several individuals have examined it, hoping to find something the original investigators missed. Some have traveled to the area marked by the circle, though accessing it requires significant effort. Those who have reached the location report nothing unusual. Dense forest, uneven terrain, no structures, no clearings, no indication that anyone had ever been there. The land is as blank as the map suggests. It holds no secrets, or it holds them too well. The keys were catalogued and stored. The ignition key and the house key were eventually discarded during an evidence purge in the early 1990s. The third key, the unmarked one, remained in storage for reasons no one documented. It still exists, filed in a box with other unidentified objects from unsolved cases. It has been examined multiple times. No one has determined what it unlocks. No one has determined why Jonas Kilroy carried it. The footprints, of course, are long gone. They were covered by snow the day after they were documented. The snow melted in May. The ground softened. The forest resumed its slow, indifferent growth. By summer, the area where Kilroy had walked was indistinguishable from any other stretch of forest. The trees grew, the moss spread, the deadfall accumulated. If his footprints had revealed anything, the forest reclaimed it. The maintenance road is still there. It is less passable now than it was in 1975. Sections have washed out. Culverts have collapsed. Trees have fallen across the roadbed, and no one has cleared them. The logging operation that built the road is gone. The utilities contractor that discovered the vehicle no longer exists. The road serves no purpose. It leads nowhere. It is used by no one. In another decade, it will be erased entirely, absorbed back into the wilderness that it briefly interrupted. The lake remains unnamed. No one has proposed a name. No one has requested one. It appears on some maps as a blue shape without annotation, a body of water defined only by its outline. It freezes in winter. It thaws in spring. Fish swim beneath its surface. Birds nest along its shore. It exists in the way that all such lakes exist, neither remarkable nor remembered, part of a landscape too vast to name in its entirety. A town where Jonas Kilroy rented a post office box no longer supports a post office. The building was closed in 1998. The records were transferred to a regional facility. The box Kilroy rented was emptied and reassigned. No unclaimed mail was found. No forwarding address was ever submitted. The box number is still listed in the archived rental agreements, but it means nothing now. It is a number in a file attached to a name that has no history. The motel where Kilroy stayed the night before his disappearance burned down in 1983. The fire started in the office and spread quickly. No one was injured. The structure was not rebuilt. The lot where it stood is now empty, overgrown with grass and low shrubs. A few locals remember the motel, but none remember Jonas Kilroy. His stay there was unremarkable, and unremarkable things are not remembered. The officer who led the investigation retired in 1989. In an interview conducted years later, he was asked about cases that stayed with him. He mentioned Kilroy briefly. He described the footprints and the way they stopped. He said, It was the only case he had encountered where the evidence seemed to contradict itself. He did not speculate about what happened. He said only that some cases do not resolve, some questions do not have answers. And sometimes that is the truth. The utilities crew that found the vehicle moved on to other work. One of them mentioned the incident in a conversation years later, but only in passing. He described it as strange, but did not elaborate. When pressed, he said the forest had felt empty that day, not quiet, empty, as though nothing was there, as though nothing had ever been there. The file itself has been digitized. The physical folder still exists, stored in a climate-controlled facility alongside thousands of other files. It is rarely accessed. When it is usually by researchers compiling data on unsolved disappearances, looking for patterns or commonalities. Jonas Kilroy's case does not fit into any pattern. It stands alone, a single event with no clear cause and no clear outcome. There have been no reported sightings of Jonas Kilroy. No one has come forward claiming to know him. No remains have been found that match his description. He has not reappeared under another name. He has not surfaced in any database. He simply ended on April 9th, 1975, at the point where his footprints stopped. Everything before that moment is fragmentary. Everything after that moment is silence. The forest where he disappeared is still there. It has not changed. It has not grown more welcoming or more hostile. It is simply what it has always been. A place where people do not go. A place where nothing happens. A place that once in a while takes something and does not give it back. In the decades since the disappearance, others have gone missing in the northern wilderness. Some have been found, some have not. The cases are not connected. They share no common elements beyond the landscape, but each time a file is opened, each time an investigator travels a forgotten road or searches a nameless stretch of forest, the question returns. What happens when someone walks into the trees and does not come back? What happens when the trail ends and the forest offers no explanation? The file on Jonas Kilroy does not answer that question. It documents it, it preserves it. And it waits, in storage, for the day when someone finds a piece of information that changes everything. A key that fits the unmarked lock. A witness who remembers. A discovery that resolves the silence. That day has not come. It may never come. The file will remain. A record of absence, a catalogue of what was not found. The last document in the file is the single typed sentence. Case suspended pending further information. No signature, no date, no department.